My daughter laughed at my dress and called it something poor people wear. I said nothing. I just smiled, because what she didn't know was that this dress was about to expose every lie she believed about me. And when I walked into that party, the truth hit her so hard, she collapsed. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to the channel. These are real-life inspired stories about family, betrayal, and quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't scream, but echoes forever. Subscribe, like, and stay till the end, because this story changes everything. I still remember the sound of her laugh. Not the joyful kind. Not the kind a daughter shares with her mother. It was sharp, dismissive, almost rehearsed, like she had been waiting for the chance to use it. She stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed, eyes scanning me from head to toe. I had just finished getting dressed, smoothing the fabric down my sides, checking my reflection one last time. The dress wasn't flashy. No sequins, no bold colors. Just a deep navy blue, clean lines, elegant in a way that didn't beg for attention. She tilted her head and smirked. "That's what you're wearing?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, it's comfortable." She laughed again, louder this time. "Mom, that looks like something poor people wear." The words landed, heavy and careless, like she hadn't even considered they might hurt, or maybe she had and just didn't care. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't react. I had learned, over the years, that reacting only gave her more power. Instead, I looked at her in the mirror, meeting her eyes calmly. "It's just a dress," I said. She rolled her eyes. "It's embarrassing. This is a high-profile party. Investors, executives, my fiancé's family. You can't show up looking like that." I turned away from the mirror and picked up my purse. My hands were steady. My voice was too. "I was invited." I said. "I'll be fine." She scoffed. "Whatever, don't say I didn't warn you." She walked away, heels clicking down the hallway, already tapping on her phone, probably texting her friends, or worse, laughing about me. I stood there for a moment after she left, staring at my reflection again, at the woman she saw as weak, poor, invisible. She had no idea how wrong she was. The party was being held at one of the most exclusive venues in the city, a restored historic estate overlooking the river, valet, crystal chandelier, a guest list so carefully curated that even the waitstaff had been background checked. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a statement that my daughter's fiancé came from money, old money, the kind that didn't talk about itself, but expected everyone else to notice. Tonight was their official engagement announcement, hosted by his parents. Everyone important would be there, and so would I. During the drive, I replayed her words in my head. Something poor people wear. The irony almost made me smile. When we arrived, she didn't even look at me. She stepped out of the car first, adjusting her designer gown, flashing practiced smiles at familiar faces. I followed behind her, moving slower, letting her create distance between us. That was fine. Distance had become our normal. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses. Men in tailored suits, women in dresses that probably cost more than my first car. The air smelled like expensive perfume and quiet judgment. I felt eyes on me almost immediately. Not the kind that lingered too long, just quick glances, calculations, curiosity. Who is she? Why is she here? I kept walking. My daughter stood near the center of the room, laughing too loudly, one hand resting possessively on her fiancé's arm. She looked radiant, confident, untouchable. She hadn't noticed me yet, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I moved toward the bar, ordered a simple glass of water, and waited. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I felt something else entirely. Because everything that mattered had already been decided, long before this party, long before that laugh, long before she ever thought she was better than me. Then I heard it. My name. Soft at first, then louder. Then whispered urgently from one group to another. I felt the shift in the room before I saw it. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. Someone dropped a glass. I turned slowly, across the room. A silver-haired man, in a tailored charcoal suit, was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. His wife stood beside him, hand frozen mid-gesture, eyes wide. They knew me, and suddenly, everyone else wanted to know why. My daughter followed their gaze. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Her smile vanished, color drained from her face. So fast, I thought she might be sick. Her hand slipped from her fiancé's arm. She took one step toward me. "Mom," she whispered. I met her eyes. Calm, steady, unapologetic. And then her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the marble floor as gasps rippled through the room. People rushed forward. Someone shouted for help. Her fiancé dropped beside her, panic on his face. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding my purse, wearing the dress she had mocked. Because now, finally, she understood, and this was only the beginning. I stepped forward only when the crowd parted, not rushing, not panicking. That alone made people look at me differently. A mother is expected to cry out, to fall to her knees, to beg someone to do something. I did none of that. I moved with purpose, like someone who already knew this moment would come. My daughter was on the floor, her fiancé kneeling beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to wake her. His mother hovered nearby, pale and rigid, whispering urgently to a staff member to call an ambulance. "Give her space," I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos. Several people looked up at me, surprised. The silver-haired man, her fiancé's father, turned fully toward me now. His eyes flicked to my face, then to my dress, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same story. "She come round," I continued. "She always does." That was when his wife stiffened. "Always?" she asked sharply. I met her gaze. Stress affects her more than she admits. They didn't question me further. They simply nodded, as if my words carried weight they couldn't quite explain. The medic arrived quickly. My daughter regained consciousness within minutes, blinking in confusion, her makeup smudged, her perfect image cracked in front of everyone who mattered. What happened?" she murmured. Her eyes found mine. Fear flashed across her face before she could stop it. "Mom," she said again, this time louder, more urgent. "Why are you here?" I leaned down slightly, close enough that only she could hear me. "You invited me," I said softly. "Remember?" Her breathing quickened. She shook her head faintly. "No, I mean, why are you here like this?" "Like this." I straightened up. "Because this is who I am." The room had gone quiet, not silent, but attentive. The kind of quiet where people pretend to sip drinks while listening to every word. The silver-haired man cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should move this conversation somewhere more private." "No," I replied. Thought the word came out gently, but firm. "No," I repeated. "This family has been built on private conversations for long enough." That was when the whispers started again. Faster this time. I heard fragments as they bounced around the room. "Family? She knows them. Who is she?" My daughter tried to sit up. Her fiancé helped her, his arm tight around her shoulders. He looked between us, confused, unsettled. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling now. "Please, not tonight." I smiled at her. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, "tonight is exactly the right night." Her future mother-in-law stepped forward, composure slipping just enough to reveal concern. "You need to explain yourself," she said to me. "You're upsetting our guests." I turned to her fully. "You're right," I said. "They deserve the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, worn envelope. Nothing fancy. No logos. Just thick paper, yellowed slightly with age. I held it up. "Does anyone here recognize this?" The silver-haired man's face drained of color. He stared at the envelope like it was a loaded weapon. "I do," he said hoarsely. Gasps erupted. My daughter's grip on her fiancé tightened. "Dad," he asked, "what is that?" His father swallowed hard. "It's something from a long time ago." I nodded. 32 years ago, I said, back when promises were easier to make than to keep. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. I turned to my daughter. "You told everyone I was just a poor woman who worked too much and expected too little," I said calmly. "You told them I came from nothing." She stared at me, frozen. "You weren't wrong," I continued. "I did come from nothing, but I didn't stay there." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a folded document. I didn't need to show it yet. The fact that I had it was enough. The silver-haired man took a step toward me. "Please," he said quietly, "this isn't the place." I met his eyes. "You made it the place," I replied, "when you decided to pretend you didn't know me." His wife looked between us, alarm growing in her eyes. "Know her how?" she demanded. I exhaled slowly. "We met when we were young," I said. "Before money, before titles, before reputations." The man's jaw tightened. "You promised," he said. "I promised to stay silent." I corrected him, and I did, for decades, for my daughter's sake. My daughter's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Mom, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at her then, really looked at her. The child I raised, the woman she became. This is what hurts the most, I said softly. Not the insult, not the laughter, but that you believed I was small. The crowd leaned in. I turned back to the man. Tell them, I said, or I will. He closed his eyes, and in that moment I knew the truth was finally going to breathe. His wife whispered, horrified, tell us what? He opened his eyes. She was my first partner, he said, in business. Gasps exploded across the room. My daughter shook her head violently. No, that's not true. He nodded slowly. We built the foundation of my company together. He continued. She walked away when I chose expansion over integrity. Every eye snapped back to me. That's why I'm here, I said. Not as a guest, not as an embarrassment. I paused. I'm here because half of what built this family was built by me, and my daughter finally understood why she fainted. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chandeliers above us. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Even the waitstaff froze in place, trays suspended midair, as if the room itself was afraid to interrupt what had just been revealed. My daughter's fiancé looked like the ground had shifted beneath him. You're saying, he began, then stopped, shaking his head. You're saying my father built everything with her. He gestured toward me, disbelief written across his face. His father nodded once, slowly, not everything, but enough that it never should have been erased. My daughter staggered to her feet, refusing the medic's help. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to tell her this was a misunderstanding. This is insane, she said, her voice rising. She's lying. She's always exaggerating. Mom, tell them you're joking. I didn't raise my voice. I kept the receipts. I said simply. A ripple of shock moved through the guests. Her future mother-in-law stepped forward again, anger replacing fear now. You expect us to believe that you, of all people, she stopped herself, eyes narrowing. You've never mentioned this. Not once, because no one asked, I replied, and because I didn't need credit to survive. That last part unsettled them more than anything else. The silver-haired man rubbed his temples, like the weight of 30 years had finally caught up to him. She signed away her shares, he said, voluntarily. Yes, I said, for $1. That did it. Voices erupted all at once. $1. Why would anyone do that? That doesn't make sense. I waited for the noise to settle before continuing. Because I was pregnant, I said, and I was told there was no room in that future for both a family and a conscience. My daughter let out a strangled sound. You're saying you did this for me. I met her eyes. I did everything for you. The room shifted again. This time, the sympathy wasn't aimed at her. Her fiancé looked at her differently now. So did his parents. So did everyone who had laughed at her jokes about her simple mother. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I didn't want you to carry bitterness, I said. I wanted you to be free. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, she said. You wanted me to think you were weak. That one stung. I wanted you to think you didn't need power to be worthy, I replied. The silver-haired man's wife finally lost her composure. You let her live like that, she snapped at her husband. You let her daughter grow up thinking her mother was nothing. He flinched. I thought it was kinda, he said quietly. I laughed then, a soft, humorless sound. Kinda for who? I asked. The answer hung in the air. My daughter's fiancé took a step away from her, just one step, but she noticed. What are you doing? She demanded. I need a minute, he said. I need to understand who I'm marrying. Her face crumpled. You're judging me for something I didn't know. He looked at her gently, sadly. I'm judging how you treated someone you thought was beneath you. That sentence did more damage than anything I had said. She turned back to me, anger flaring through her fear. You could have stopped me, she said. You could have told me before I embarrassed myself. I tilted my head. You didn't embarrass yourself because of me, I said. You embarrassed yourself because of how you spoke. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no defense. The silver-haired man cleared his throat again. There's more, he said reluctantly. Every head turned to him. What more? His wife demanded. He looked at me, asking permission without words. I nodded once. She didn't just help build the company, he said. She designed the original framework that still generates most of our revenue today. Gasps filled the room again. That's impossible, someone whispered. Those systems are legendary. They're hers, he said. I just scaled them. My daughter swayed slightly, like the room was tilting. All those nights, she murmured. All those times you said you were working late. I said, just not where you thought. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a slim leather folder, this time newer, polished. I didn't come here to destroy anything, I said. I came to attend a party. I opened the folder, but since the truth has arrived, I continued, it might as well finish what it started. I slid the documents onto the nearest table. What is that? My daughter asked. I smiled and nodded. The word echoed like a gunshot. The silver-haired man went pale. You wouldn't, he whispered. I already did, I replied. And that was the moment my daughter realized this wasn't revenge fueled by anger. This was justice, delivered quietly, patiently, and on time. The word audit didn't just land in the room, it detonated. People stepped back instinctively, like distance might protect them from whatever invisible blast was coming next. Phones appeared in hands, lowered quickly when they realized this wasn't the kind of moment you recorded without consequences. My daughter stared at the documents like they might bite her. You planned this, she said. I shook my head. I prepared for it. There's a difference, and people who've lived quietly learn it early. Her fiancé's mother grabbed one of the pages, scanning it quickly. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then lifted to her husband with something close to betrayal. These dates, she said, they go back decades. Yes, I replied, right back to when intellectual contributions were easier to erase if they came from a woman without a last name worth protecting. The silver-haired man sank into a nearby chair. He looked smaller now, older, like the power that once wrapped around him had slipped off in public. I thought we were past this, he said. We were, I answered, until my daughter decided my worth was measured by my dress. That hit her like a slap. She flinched. I didn't mean you meant exactly what you said, I interrupted gently, and you said it because you believed it. Her fiancé exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You told me she was just traditional, he said to her, that she didn't understand our world. My daughter's voice cracked, because that's what I thought. And why did you think that? I asked. She opened her mouth, then stopped, because I let her. That truth sat between us, raw and unavoidable. I turned to the guests, then the investors, the board members, the people who had smiled politely at me earlier. I didn't come here to shame anyone, I said, but I won't be erased to make others comfortable. One man near the back cleared his throat. If these claims are valid, he said carefully, this could change ownership structures. They are valid, I replied, and they already are. Another wave of murmurs rolled through the room. My daughter's fiancé's mother looked like she might faint this time. You filed this before tonight? She asked. Yes, the day I received the invitation. My daughter stared at me, stunned. You knew I was ashamed of you, and you still came. I met her gaze. I knew you were confused about what strength looks like. Tears streamed down her face now, but the room didn't rush to comfort her. Sympathy had shifted quietly, decisively. Her fiancé took another step away from her. I need air, he said. She reached for him desperately. Please don't leave. Not like this. He paused, his back to her. You didn't just insult your mother, he said. You built your identity on believing she was less than you. Then he walked away. The sound of the door closing echoed louder than any gasp. My daughter let out a sob and sank into a chair, her perfect posture collapsing along with her certainty. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, I said, but you never asked. Her future mother-in-law approached me cautiously now, pride stripped bare. What do you want? She asked. I considered the question. For years, I said. I wanted acknowledgement. Then, I wanted fairness. Then I wanted peace. I paused. Tonight, I continued, I want my daughter to understand that humility is not humiliation. My daughter looked up at me through tears. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't see you. I know, I replied. You were looking in mirrors. That silence felt different, not shocked, not angry, reflective. The silver-haired man finally spoke again, his voice barely audible. What happens now? I closed the folder. Now, I said, now the truth does what it always does. I picked up my purse. It rearranges everything. And for the first time in her life, my daughter understood that the woman she called poor had been priceless all along. The party didn't end right away. People lingered, not because they were enjoying themselves, but because no one knew how to leave a moment like this without acknowledging it had changed them. Conversations restarted in low, cautious tones. Laughter didn't return. Smiles felt forced. My daughter stayed seated, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I watched her from across the room and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, grief, not for what she had lost, but for how long she had lived without knowing who she was standing on. A woman approached me, one I recognized from old board photos, though she looked older now. I worked under your framework, she said quietly. I never knew your name. I nodded. Most didn't. I'm glad they will now, she said, then paused. But I hope you know, you survived something most people never would. I smiled faintly. I didn't survive it. I built a life around it. Across the room, my daughter's future mother-in-law was speaking urgently to attorneys on her phone. Her voice was controlled, but her hands trembled. The image of power she had curated for decades was cracking, not because of scandal, but because truth doesn't ask permission. My daughter finally stood. Her legs wobbled, but she didn't sit back down. She walked toward me slowly, every step heavy, every eye tracking her movement. When she stopped in front of me, she didn't speak right away. She looked at my dress, really looked at it. The clean stitching, the tailored fit, the confidence it carried without decoration. This isn't a poor person's dress, she said quietly. No, I replied, it's a woman's dress. Her throat tightened. I built my whole life believing you were someone I needed to outgrow, she whispered, so I wouldn't become you. I held her gaze. And now, I asked. She swallowed. Now, I realize you were someone I was supposed to understand. That was progress, not forgiveness, but awareness. I don't know who I am without the story I told about you, she admitted. That's normal, I said. False narratives collapse loudly. Her eyes filled again. Do you hate me? I shook my head. Hate takes energy. I invested mine elsewhere. She let out a shaky breath that sounded like relief and regret tangled together. The silver-haired man approached us slowly, shoulders slumped, pride gone. I owe you more than an apology, he said. You owe the truth, I replied. And you've finally given it. He nodded. I never thought you'd come back like this. I never left, I said. You just stopped looking. Security gently began guiding guests toward the exits. The night was ending, but not neatly. As people passed me, some nodded respectfully. Others avoided eye contact. A few whispered my name like it had always belonged in the room. My daughter stood beside me, silent. As we walked toward the door together, she stopped. Mom, she said, if I lose everything, will you still be here? I paused. I was here when I had nothing, I said, but what happens next depends on who you choose to become. She nodded, understanding that love wasn't being withdrawn, it was being redefined. Outside, the night air felt cooler, cleaner. Valets waited, cars pulled up. My daughter looked at me one more time. I thought power was loud, she said, but tonight, you didn't raise your voice once. I smiled. Power doesn't need permission, I said, it just stops asking. And as we stepped into the night, she finally walked beside me, not ahead, not behind. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that follows an earthquake, when everything looks the same from a distance, but you know the ground has shifted underneath. My daughter sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. She didn't check her phone, didn't fix her makeup, didn't ask what would happen next. That alone told me how deeply the night had cut. When we pulled into the driveway, she hesitated before getting out. Can I come in? She asked, like a guest. I nodded. Of course. Inside the house felt smaller than the venue we'd left behind, but warmer, real. She glanced around, noticing details she'd ignored for years. The framed photos, the books stacked neatly by the couch, the quiet order of a life built intentionally, not impressively. You did all this by yourself, she said. Yes, I replied, but not alone. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly. I don't know how to fix this, she said. With them, with myself. You don't fix truth, I said. You live with it. She nodded slowly. After a long pause, she asked, did you ever resent me? The question caught me off guard, not because it hurt, but because it showed growth. No, I said honestly, but I resented the silence. I thought I owed the world. She looked down. I benefited from that silence. Yes, I said, and now you're free from it too. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm scared. Good, I said gently. Fear means something real is happening. She laughed weakly through her tears. You always talk like that. That's because I've always been listening, I replied. Later that night, after she left, I sat alone in the kitchen and allowed myself something I hadn't at the party. I exhaled, not in relief, but release. That the legal consequences moved faster than anyone expected. Emails arrived, meetings were requested, old contracts were pulled from archives that hadn't been touched in decades, and with every message, my daughter's world shifted further. She called me one afternoon, voice shaking. "They're asking questions at the office," she said. "People look at me differently." "How?" I asked. "Like they're seeing me for the first time," she said, "and not liking what they see." "That's not punishment," I replied. "That's accountability." Silence on the line. "I don't know how to rebuild trust," she said. "You don't," I answered. "You earn it." Days later, she showed up again, this time with no announcement. She brought groceries, cooked dinner, cleaned without being asked. It wasn't dramatic, and that's why it mattered. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, she said quietly, "I used to think you settled for less." I smiled faintly. "I chose peace," she nodded, finally understanding the difference. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation. Articles hinted, names were avoided. A story without a villain was hard to sell. But inside these walls, something steadier was forming. Not forgiveness yet, but truth, and the fragile beginnings of respect. The first article came out on a Tuesday morning. It didn't name me directly, but I recognized every detail: the dates, the restructuring, the sudden resignation of a senior board member who had been with the company since the beginning. Words like legacy, correction, and long overdue recognition floated through the paragraphs like careful apologies. My daughter sent me the link. "I didn't tell anyone," she wrote. "I swear." "I know," I replied. "Truth doesn't need a spokesperson." She showed up that evening looking exhausted, not the tiredness of long hours, the kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly for the first time. "They're asking me to step back from the foundation," she said, dropping onto the couch. "Not officially, just suggested." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked. She stared at her hands, ashamed, relieved, terrified. "All appropriate," I said. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You always sound like a therapist." "No," I said. "Therapists charge by the hour." She smiled, a real one this time, brief but real. Later, as we washed dishes, she said something that stopped me. "I've been thinking about the dress." I glanced at her. "What about it?" "You didn't wear it to prove anything," she said slowly. "You wore it because it was enough." I turned off the sink and faced her fully. "That realization," I said, "is more valuable than any apology." She nodded, swallowing hard. A week later, the silver-haired man requested a private meeting. No attorneys, no assistants, just him. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe far from downtown, the kind of place that didn't care who you used to be. He looked older than he had at the party, stripped of audience. He was just a man sitting across from a woman he once underestimated. "I was afraid of you," he admitted. "That's new," I said. "You were brilliant," he continued, "and principled. I knew if you stayed, I wouldn't be able to justify the choices I wanted to make." I sipped my tea. "So you erased me?" "Yes," he said. "And when I saw you at the party, wearing that dress," he shook his head, "I realized power had never left you." I didn't respond. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know," I replied, "but apologies don't rewrite history." He nodded. "What will consistency?" I said. "And silence?" He frowned. "Live differently," I clarified. "That's the only restitution that lasts." When I got home, my daughter was waiting on the porch. "I heard you met him," she said. Double quotes. "Yes." "What did you say?" I told him the truth. She hesitated. "About me." I met her eyes. I told him my daughter is learning. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. That night, she stayed for dinner again. We talked about small things, normal things, no headlines, no legacies. At one point she said quietly, "I don't want to be impressive anymore." I looked at her. "I want to be decent," she finished. That was the moment I knew the cycle had broken. The weeks that followed moved differently than anything before them, not slower, just deeper. My daughter stopped chasing appearances. She sold the condo she couldn't afford without help. She withdrew from social circles that had thrived on comparison. Invitations stopped coming, and instead of panicking, she slept better than she had in years. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sky turn amber, she spoke without looking at me. "I didn't lose my life," she said. "I lost a costume." I nodded. "Costumes are heavy. You just don't notice until you take them off." She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought humility meant being smaller. It means being honest, I said. Smaller is optional. She began volunteering quietly, not for publicity, not to fix her image. She helped at a women's financial literacy center, teaching budgeting, listening more than she spoke. No one there knew who she used to be, and for the first time, she didn't want them to. One night she came home with red eyes and a tired smile. A woman thanked me today, she said, not because I helped her, but because I didn't judge her. I smiled. That's how repair begins. Meanwhile, the corporate world continued rearranging itself without asking for my opinion. Shares shifted. Names were added to records. My contribution was acknowledged in footnotes, then in reports, then quietly, in conversations that mattered. I didn't attend ceremonies. I didn't give interviews. Recognition, I had learned, is sweetest when it arrives without demanding your presence. One afternoon, my daughter found the dress while helping me reorganize the closet. She held it carefully, like an artifact. You know, she said, people still talk about that night. I raised an eyebrow. Do they? They say you destroyed a family. I laughed softly. People say many things when their comfort is interrupted. She folded the dress over her arm. I think you saved one. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no defensiveness, no performance, just truth. Months later, she received a letter, not an invitation, an apology, from her former fiancé. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. He wrote that he had loved who he thought she was, and respected who she was becoming, that he needed distance, but wished her clarity. She cried after reading it, not because she wanted him back, but because she finally understood what she had lost, and why it had to be lost. I don't hate him, she said quietly. That's growth, I replied. Time passed. The world moved on. And one day, without planning it, my daughter asked, would you come with me? Where? I asked. She smiled nervously. I've been asked to speak, not about success, about failure. We stood on a small stage in a modest room, no cameras, no spotlights, just people. She spoke simply, about arrogance, about assumptions, about the danger of measuring worth by appearances. She didn't mention names, she mentioned lessons. At the end, she looked at me in the audience and said, I used to think my mother was ordinary. Her voice didn't break, but it softened. She's the strongest person I know. There was no applause at first. Then there was, not thunderous, earned. Later that night, as we walked home together, she slipped her arm through mine. Thank you for not protecting me from the truth, she said. I protected you from lies, I replied. There's a difference. At home, she paused by the closet again. Do you still wear it? She asked, nodding toward the dress. Yes, I said, when I need to remember who I am. She smiled. I don't think I'll ever forget again. And I believed her, because the fainting wasn't the end of her strength. It was the beginning of her awakening, and mine had never been lost at all. The months following the party were quieter than the night itself, but they carried a weight that no one else could see. The city's social circles buzzed with speculation, but inside our home, reality moved at its own pace. My daughter began to confront her own behavior. She'd spent years defining herself by appearances, by status, by what she thought others expected of her. Now, she had nothing to hide behind. No labels, no designer tags, no assumptions about my place in the world. She had to meet herself, unvarnished. At first, she resisted it. One evening, she stormed into the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. Her face was red, and her hands trembled slightly. I hate this, she shouted, slamming her purse on the counter. I hate that I have to admit I was wrong. I hate that people I trusted looked at me differently. I set down the knife and leaned against the counter, calm, patient. Those feelings are part of the process, I said softly. You've spent years building an image. Now it's coming down. That's hard, but necessary. Her voice cracked. But why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you tell me before I humiliated you? Humiliated myself. I did, I said, every day in ways you didn't notice. I showed you that power doesn't scream. That strength is quiet. You just weren't ready to see it yet. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she let herself sink into a chair, exhausted, as if the weight of decades of misunderstanding had finally hit her at once. Days later, she began volunteering, not for appearances, not to fix her image, but because she wanted to. She started teaching at a local nonprofit focused on helping women build financial independence. At first, she struggled. She didn't know how to connect without showing off, how to lead without dominating. But she learned, slowly, She'd call me afterward, exhausted but exhilarated. "I didn't think it would feel this good," she said one evening. "Not to teach, not to help, just to be honest." I smiled. Truth has a way of doing that. Meanwhile, the corporate world she had once sought to impress continued its quiet reckoning. Employees spoke to me directly now, no longer whispering my name behind closed doors. Contracts and documents that once ignored my input were corrected. My daughter, watching it all unfold, realized how much influence I had wielded without ever needing recognition. One evening, she asked, "Why didn't you just take credit?" I paused. Because I didn't need validation from those who wouldn't see it anyway. I was focused on building something lasting, not something flashy. She frowned, thoughtful. "I think I finally understand. You didn't survive by hiding. You survived by being deliberate, careful, and patient." I nodded. "Exactly. And now it's your turn to see that for yourself." We spent another quiet week together, going through old photos, sorting documents, talking late into the night about mistakes, choices, and the lessons hidden in both. She began to smile more freely, without fear of judgment or expectation. And one afternoon, she found the dress I had worn to the party. She held it reverently, almost as if it were a relic from a battle she had just watched from afar. "You wore this for me, didn't you?" she asked softly. "I wore it for myself," I corrected gently. "And for you, to show you that dignity isn't about cost or status." Tears welled in her eyes. "I see that now." Her journey wasn't over. She still had to rebuild trust with friends, colleagues, and even herself. But for the first time, she had a map, the kind that doesn't come from textbooks, lectures, or social media, but from lived experience, hard-earned and honest. The fainting incident had been the beginning. The humiliation had been the teacher. And the truth, quietly, deliberately delivered, had been the only path to freedom. She looked at me then. Really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see a daughter who had mocked me. I saw a young woman ready to meet herself, capable, aware, and learning to wield quiet power just as I had. And in that moment, I realized the party, the dress, the fainting, none of it was about shame. It had been about revelation. The months that followed were nothing like the night of the party. No dramatic entrances, no fainting or whispered gossip. But the lessons, the shifts, and the truths continued to ripple through our lives quietly, profoundly. My daughter no longer sought approval. She stopped chasing designer labels and social validation. She focused on understanding herself, on learning what strength really looked like. Strength wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, quietly. And those who mattered would notice. In time. She began volunteering consistently. Not for recognition, but because she genuinely wanted to make a difference. Teaching at the Women's Financial Literacy Center, she helped women navigate budgeting, credit, and self-empowerment. She didn't brag. She didn't put herself forward. She listened. She advised. She guided. Each night, when she returned home exhausted but fulfilled, she would share stories of the women she had met. Their struggles reminded her of her own arrogance, her own Slowly, she became more grounded, more aware. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, she paused and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "all those years I thought power was loud, visible, untouchable. I see now that it isn't real power. It's like you, calm, intentional, resilient." I smiled faintly. "And you're beginning to understand it in your own way." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I don't think I'll ever be able to measure worth the way I used to. Not for myself, not for anyone." I reached out and took her hand. "That's a start. The rest comes with time." We sat together in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft chatter of the neighborhood outside the window filling the quiet space. No drama, no audience, just two people learning to rebuild a relationship that had been fractured by assumption and pride. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at our door. My daughter opened it first, expecting another request from her former fiancé's family or some lingering corporate notice. Instead, it was a personal note, an acknowledgement of her growth, a quiet apology, and a note that she was free to move forward without shame or expectation. She read it to me aloud. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't flinch. She understood that this wasn't a gift. It was a closure, one she earned by facing the truth of her own actions. "I don't hate him," she said afterward. "I just understand now what matters." "That's all any of us can ask for," I replied. Over the following months, we rebuilt our home life with intention. There was still tension at times, but it was honest tension, not the hidden judgments of before. We cooked together, cleaned together, and even laughed together in ways that had been impossible just a year ago. One day, while reorganizing the closet, she picked up the navy dress I had worn to the party. She held it up reverently, as though she were holding a symbol of something she had finally understood. "You still wear this?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, "when I need to remember who I am and how far we've come." She nodded, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I'll never forget. Not the dress, not that night, not the lesson. The dress, the party, the fainting. It had all been part of a larger story. A story of quiet power, of patience, of endurance, of teaching and learning, not through shouting, but through living honestly. By the end, my daughter had learned what I had always known. Dignity isn't purchased, strength isn't flaunted, and true respect isn't demanded. It's earned, quietly, through truth, consistency, and grace. And as we sat together on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for showing me the real meaning of strength." I held her hand, feeling the warmth of understanding pass between us. "You're welcome," I said. "But remember, the world will always try to teach you otherwise. Stay quiet, stay deliberate, stay yourself." And for the first time, we both understood, power isn't in the dress, the recognition, or the confrontation. Power is in truth. Power is in patience. Power is in the calm certainty that no one can take away what you've built quietly, steadily, and honestly. And in that moment, everything finally felt complete.